Fantastic. Okay, so I guess it is working then. Great. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. My name is Micheal Keeling, and today we're going to talk about mighty methods. And I guess first off, hello from Pittsburgh, and thanks for bearing with me through the technical challenges of kind of getting this set up. Yeah, it's great to connect with everybody, even if it's only virtually. Not gonna lie, it's been a bit of cabin fever, living in the pandemic life, working from home over the past several months. So it is really great to get to interact with all of you, even if only virtually. I am joining you from the East Coast United States in Pittsburgh, which is right about there for those of you not familiar. My family, they're home with me, of course, and they're doing some school and things like that. They know I'm giving a talk today. My kiddos come in and decide to visit. We'll just roll with it. It's just how things go these days. So no worries. All right. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about this idea of a silver toolbox a little bit today. And the my goal really is to give you some new ideas that you can put into your silver toolbox. As the saying goes, there's no such thing as silver bullets, but each of us carries with us this collection of tools, these ideas, methods, patterns, practices, sometimes literal software tools that help us, design and build software, amazing software, even better, to the best that we can. We use these things in combination, right? There's no single thing that works, but we draw from this collection that we have to design and build software. This metaphor was a really big idea throughout the book that I wrote, Design It. It captures kind of these fundamentals in software architecture design, but also a collection, as Olaf was mentioning, of practical design methods, over 40 of them in the book. Kind of an interesting side note, for every method that made it into the book, there were probably 2 or 3 more that weren't included. Just not enough space to include everything, and not everything was perhaps worth putting down on paper in that format. I guess some people collect coins. I collect software design methods over the past decade or so. So one thing that I've noticed with all of these design methods that I've seen is that there are many useful design methods out there, but some methods are significantly more useful in many more situations than others. And I've started calling these mighty methods. Now, I wish I could say that the nice alliteration was inspired by something meaningful, other than just the idea of just strength or power for these methods. Realistically, it came from this TV show that my kids have been watching, Mighty Pups, which, if you're not familiar, it's some superhero dogs that save this small town in Canada. If you didn't know about it so far, well, you're welcome. Now you know about it. So it's really fun show for the kiddos that they love. But we're not here to talk about Mighty Pups today. We're talking about mighty methods, which is here's kind of a stab at a definition. So a mighty method is a reliably useful software design approach. Okay, reliably useful in a variety of contexts and a variety of situations, software systems, and something that is used relatively frequently. All right, over the past several years, I've seen, I think, about 4 of these. Mob programming, example mapping, architecture decision records, or ADRs for short, and visual thinking. So I'm going to share, let's see here, we're going to walk through why these things work, and I'm going to share examples from each of them. I am not going to have time to go into deep detail for all these different methods, but no worries, okay? I've got lots of slides in backup that I'm going to share with everybody, add to the team room after the talk is over. And if there's any questions or anything you want to talk about any of these things, just reach out. I'm more than happy to nerd out on all these topics. Visual thinking is not going to receive as direct a treatment as the other 3. But it is prevalent throughout many of these things. Anytime you see these 2 eyeballs icon, that's when there's some aspect of visual thinking that's happening that I'd like to point out. Okay, So we're going to explore those things. Before we do that, though, I guess a fair question might be, how do we know that these methods are reliably useful? How confident are we in what I'm about to share with you? So taking an idea from this great paper by Christopher Scafidi and Mary Shaw, we can think about evidence, especially evidence coming from practice, kind of on a spectrum, all the way from, I used about it one time and maybe it seemed to work, all the way to there's lots of empirical evidence that suggests, this thing is rock solid. For these particular experiences, these are things that I have used many times. I've used them with many different teams, so many different contexts and settings. I've also used them on several different software systems, several different kinds of software systems, cloud-based AI, data analysis type things, traditional kind of web things, fintech, lots of different situations where these have been applied. And then also there are many published experience reports on each of these methods that are out there and widely available. So it's not just my experiences that are kind of backing these things up, but experiences from other practitioners as well. You could say that we have very, very strong evidence from practice that these methods have something special about them. Now, I guess kind of for the gap that's remaining, maybe someone today hearing this talk will be inspired. You can insert your PhD thesis here and kind of help us close the gap on finding more empirical evidence. But for now, we can suffice to say that we have very strong evidence from practice that these are good methods. Okay, so what makes these methods mighty? Reflecting on these four methods that I use frequently, it looks like there's about five things that five attributes that they all seem to have. They facilitate human-centered design. There's a strong bias towards concrete outcomes. They consider the whole design space when you're using them. They promote team growth, or they create opportunities for encouraging team growth. And then they're easy to teach and surprisingly fun to use. Yeah, we're going to go through each of these kind of in turn and go a little deeper and see some examples of how these different methods help with these things, or exhibit these attributes rather. So we'll start with facilitating human-centered design. All right, human-centered design, it asks us to kind of fully understand the perspectives of people involved in the system. So we're looking at building empathy, understanding the individuals who interact with the system or who are affected by a system, and we really want to get a feeling for their needs and what they benefit from the software. All right. Here's an example of a stakeholder map, a fantastic method, not a mighty method, though it is a very visual, great example of a visual aid. What it kind of shows, going through stakeholder mapping is we have maybe the obvious individuals who work with our system, the users or the administrators, things like that. But very quickly we find that there are, a large number of secondary or tertiary individuals who are affected by the software that we build. Okay. To demonstrate this idea, we're going to take a look at example mapping in a little more detail. So example mapping is something that comes from, let's see, on the surface, I guess it's a requirements analysis technique. So a lot of times you'll hear this idea of a user story being a placeholder for a conversation. So if a user story is that placeholder, well, example mapping is kind of a structured conversation for exploring the design space around that story. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Here's an example of maybe a typical user story that you might see on any backlog. As a buyer user, I can submit an offer so that I can buy a house. Okay. It's a statement of need. It's user-centered, which is nice already, right? A buyer user. But it really doesn't give us much to go on. If I were to hand this over to a developer on my team, we wouldn't know what to do with it. Flip the card over though, and there's a lot. Usually, you'll find a lot more information, acceptance criteria, technical notes, ideas about how we might test the story. Sometimes we have wireframes or UI screens. There's whole design bits that go along with it. Okay, lots of information. The big question is, how did I get from this simple statement of, oh, as a buyer user, I can submit a house or submit an offer to, all this additional information? And that's where example mapping comes in. There's three basic building blocks to building an example map. The story, which was that statement we saw earlier, a business rule, which is really, a business rule. It's an explanation of some logic with a clear kind of pass-fail criteria. And then the examples, which are concrete kind of instantiations of that business rule. Additionally, within the maps themselves, we've got open questions and design notes, and I'll kind of show an example of how that all comes together here. So here's a completed map. So we've got the story at the top, and you kind of build it out hierarchically, iteratively over about a course of about 25 minutes or so. You might start off with a simple question, like what's the largest offer we're willing to accept? Doing some research, we could find that, oh, well, the most expensive building in the United States is only $4 billion, right? So maybe that's a good upper bounds for us. From there, we can create a business rule that, maybe the offers that we allow are between, greater than 0, but less than 4 billion. Okay, that's our business rule. The cool part, though, comes in when we start specifying the examples. Okay, $1 passes, negative $1 fails, and something that's not a number would fail. Okay, so the examples are a different perspective on the business rule, different way of kind of describing it, which is creating opportunities for communication with people. We're confirming that the words that my product manager is telling me that we're actually understanding each other, which is pretty cool. I'll touch on this in a little bit, but there's some white kind of sticky notes at the bottom there, talking about kind of technical details. So things about the API or assumptions about architectural elements, which is kind of interesting. And then there's our eyeballs. This is a very visual method, right? You can start to see interesting things about the size and scope based on the number of stories we have or the number of examples that are coming about. So cool method overall. Yeah, and we're talking about how it's human-centered. So let's kind of focus on that for a sec. We start with that user-focused statement of need by kind of making it well, these days it's digital, but by kind of having an open platform, we're inviting participation from multiple stakeholders. By giving everyone an opportunity to kind of type or write, we're giving different voice to the different design perspectives in the room. And most importantly, it's about communication. I'm giving my testers, people with kind of a testing mindset, something that they can understand, my product manager, my design team, my subject matter experts. We want everybody on the same page. And that's really where this method shines. Okay, so there was one example of kind of human-centered design. Let's take a look at bias toward concrete actions. And really what this is about is how well a mighty method gets the job done, okay? For this, we're gonna look at architecture decision records, okay? Or ADRs. Decision records have been around for a really long time. This definition back in 2011 by Michael Nygaard is probably one of the more popular ones recently. And basically, it frames a decision record as a short text file in a format similar to an Alexandrian pattern that describes a set of forces and a single decision and the responses to those forces. Okay. If you're familiar with patterns, then this is something that is going to be very familiar to you. Basically, a context, decision, and then the way the world changes as a result of that decision. Okay. ADRs these days are typically short, very brief. They capture a single decision in very kind of plain language that people would use normally on your team every day. Markdown or plain text, so keep it simple. And then often we encourage it to be stored, close to the context of use. So on my team, that means it's something that is going to be stored in the code itself. Okay. And here's a concrete example. In this particular one, it's a decision to use a particular pipe and filter library. So the team has decided to implement a pattern and then use a hoist in a library to enforce the use of that pattern. The text is a little bit small, but it talks about how there was a first attempt at this pattern and the architecture eventually eroded. The middle part there is basically just the decision itself. We'll use this pipe and filter library, and then as a result of that, applying that decision, the consequences the team was hoping to get had to do with the mostly quality attributes around maintainability and reliability of the system overall. So a nice, neat little decision record there. Very short, but has a big impact for us. And I guess that's the key. We're talking about concrete outcomes. Where I see ADRs kind of filling that role is that by doing just a little bit of work every day, we have a huge impact over time. And just to kind of demonstrate this, here's a recent example where a different team was specified on the order of 30 or so ADRs over a course of about 5 months, building out 1 or 2 at a time. As you can see, occasionally stubbing them and filling them in later. All told, that's probably about 40 pages of design documentation, really good design documentation too, that goes deep into a lot of different areas. If we had asked anybody to do that up front, nobody would have done it. If we had asked them to do it at the end, nobody would have remembered what actually happened. So taking small kind of concrete steps, led to a very significant outcome for us over time. All right. So Mighty methods also help us consider the whole design space. And really what this is about is looking at not just the problem and not just the solution, but really both of those all together at the same time. And I think mob programming is really one that shines on this front. So we'll use that as the example. Mob programming is a technique that is pretty interesting. So it's a software development approach where the whole team works together on the same thing at the same time, in the same space, and at the same computer. This is coming from Woody Zuhl's experience report on this, which was kind of the first reported example of mob programming. Obviously, working from home, working remotely, it's a little bit different. We're not, in the same space per se, but we do. How do we do this? So my team sets up a Meet, Google Meet, kind of like what we're using now. We'll do screen shares and use live coding plugins, such as the VS Code Live Share plugin, and it still seems to work out pretty well. Back when we used to build software all together in one place, this is what Woody Zuhl's setup looked like. So they had some projectors set up. They brought the team together into one area, and multiple keyboards. I think one was set up for QWERTY, the other one for Dvorak, so that everybody kind of felt comfortable in the development environment. Right. One of the keys for mob programming working is this idea, kind of the core principle, this idea that you treat each other with kindness, consideration, and respect. Okay, so if you're doing that well, if you're kind of following this rule, then a lot of other things just seem to work really well. Note, this is a very human-centered kind of idea, right? Treating each other with kindness, consideration, and respect. Okay. Let's see. So typical mob programming session for us. I guess I should kind of caveat this by saying that, mob programming is kind of a horrible name for it because we do a lot more than just programming. So we start off by deciding what to work on, kind of organizing as a group around the goal. We'll look at the example map, so we'll explore the problem. As a group of 3 or 4 developers, we'll sketch out solutions and decide the path forward that we want to take. We will do some writing code, tests, and refactoring, of course, and then we're deploying to production as often as we can. And this is all happening in the mob, some of it all at the same time, which is pretty cool. Okay, as I mentioned, the mob does so much more than just programming. Okay, Here's an example of an artifact that we maintain during our mob programming sections. It's something we call an architecture garden. It's a great example of a visual thinking element as well. So you can see all kinds of cool stuff in here. So while maybe there's a driver and a navigator working together, someone is listening to that conversation, and there's updating views of the architecture. Maybe during those early discussions, we're getting capturing alternatives that we explored, or while different branches of the code are being written, we're updating trade-off analysis as we go, all happening at the same time, which is super cool. Example mapping is another great example of how we can explore the whole design space at once as well. Okay, here's another real world example for you. You can see the completed example maps that we saw previously here. Okay, but you can also see that there are false starts that we just kind of leave hanging out. These are areas where we might have been going down a path that turned out to be a dead end. You can see that we pull in elements of the user interface design, so the getting into the solution. We will update these in real time as we're exploring the example maps. You can see that we are exploring domain models, okay, at the same time as we're doing this. Sometimes these, or a lot of times, these translate directly into class models or database schemas. We're looking at state machines. We're already thinking about algorithms. We're exploring aspects of the APIs. Okay, the cool part about these two methods is that they are kind of open and allow or encourage you to explore that whole design space at once. All right. So considering the whole design space at once. So Mighty methods also help us to promote team growth. All right. My goal really as an architect is to grow a team of architectural thinkers. Okay, I don't want to be the only architect on my team. I want everybody else to kind of join me in this journey. Okay, really what that's all about for me is a lot of mentoring, but also trying to find opportunities for safe practice. And perhaps one of the best examples of this is, well, there's a lot of great examples, but best example, and the one I'm going to talk about today, is ADRs, Architecture Decision Records. Okay. Here's some data that we pulled from my team at IBM over the course of using ADRs for about it looks like this is just shy of 2 years. Okay, let's see here. In the beginning, the tech lead was, you can kind of clearly see, was the person who was making all the decisions for probably the first 2 or 3 months that team was using this technique. Okay, it was a very top-down, top-down kind of a role that the tech lead was playing at that time. But you can see over time more and more teammates getting involved in the design. After a year, the tech lead is only responsible for about half the decisions, and maybe 9 months after that, maybe only a third. What I really like about this chart, and what I think is kind of the coolest thing about this experience that I had with my team at IBM, is you can see these moments where teammates are kind of growing and taking responsibility for different parts of the system. You can see these bursts of decisions that are happening where different people are stepping up and kind of trying out the architect role, which is really awesome. Really embrace the mindset. The reason ADRs kind of encourage or allow this to happen is each one is such a small, discrete practice area that it's super safe to let people, really stretch and do the trade-off analysis and go deep on those different things. And because a lot of the times we're storing the ADR with the code, it kind of integrates seamlessly in with the existing code review process. So I'm able to learn from my teammates as they're going deep into different areas of the design, understand what is being explored and what they're learning. I'm able to kind of nudge them as well, encourage different analysis or bringing up different risks that should be considered. So it's a really great opportunity for kind of this back and forth and back and forth sort of mentoring, basically through pairing and code review, which a lot of people are already familiar with. So very, very cool stuff. I guess I should mention mob programming is a similar kind of vein, right? So you're working hand in hand with your teammates every day. You have lots of opportunities for mentoring with that as well, just by switching up the driver and the navigator role. All right, last up for what makes a method mighty is that they're easy to teach and they're fun to use. Realistically, this is all about adoption. And let's see here, for this one, I don't have as many ready examples for this, but I do have some observations to share. Okay, so even if you have the best method in the world, if nobody wants to use it, or if you're the one who has to constantly be kind of pressing on it for use, it's not going to get very far. Okay, what I've noticed about these four in particular that I think makes them easy to teach and kind of ripe for adoption. Each of these methods has a clear purpose. They might have a single goal or a single outcome that they're trying to encourage. There are very few steps involved in teaching them. You know, with an ADR, you fill in a template. With mob programming, well, the primary focus is programming, and if you've done pair programming, it's a a kind of a driver navigator situation is the starting point for that metaphor. Example mapping only has 3 or 4 steps, very simple and straightforward. Each of these can be self-facilitated. You don't have to have a trained facilitator come in and kind of oversee or make sure that you're following the steps or following the process. This is, I think, extremely powerful. For these in particular, there's also minimal kind of knowledge prerequisites. You don't have to have a wealth of knowledge or have been studying for months and months to be able to pick these up and use them. Okay, this makes it very easy for lots of people to pick them up and adapt and use. All right, so 5 attributes that make 5 attributes of mighty methods: facilitating human-centered design, a bias toward concrete action. They look at the whole design space. They promote team growth, and they're easy to use, easy to teach, and fun to use. We saw examples from 4 different things. I know it's not as deep as I would have liked to have gone, but I hope that there was enough for you to get started with some of these. Mob programming, example mapping, architecture decision records, and some examples of visual thinking. Thinking about this further, I've been kind of pondering, are there other potential mighty methods? And 2 that come to mind immediately are event storming and model-minded development, which is something that George Fairbanks has been kind of working on for the past couple of years. Both of these, I think, exhibit several of the attributes, several of those 5 attributes that we just saw. They show a lot of promise. I think that there's some things to figure out with each of them, potentially to make them broadly applicable or extremely easy to pick up. But there's something in both of those that I think could be really useful. That could make them really mighty, I guess, and not just really, really useful, because they already are really great. I guess a question to kind of turn it on you all, what mighty methods have you seen? Because I bet there's more out there, and I bet you have some success stories that would be really great to hear about as well. So yeah, let me know. That would be really, that'd be really great to hear. One thought on this. So reflecting on this talk and kind of reflecting on these methods themselves as I was going through this, I found myself wondering, like, what about these? Why do I consider these to be kind of architecture design methods, or are these really architecture focused methods at all? And yeah, I mean, on the surface, there's nothing inherently architectural about mob programming. Perhaps it's just the individuals in the room, or example mapping, right? That's a requirements gathering kind of technique. And yet somehow when my teams are practicing it, we're bringing in architectural elements as we think about it. I think my response to that is this wonderful quote by Robert Henry that I first heard by Woody Zuhl. The object isn't to make art, It's to be in that wonderful state which makes art inevitable. And something that I've kind of been wondering about is, what if an architect's job is not necessarily to design a great system architecture, but what if it's to, put our team in that wonderful state that makes designing great system architectures inevitable? That seems really interesting to me, and I think each of these methods really fits that kind of mold. We make designing amazing architectures inevitable. Well, I hope I've given you some new ideas that you can put into your silver toolbox, or at least some things to think about today. Well, thank you very much for your time. I tried to leave extra time so that we could have some discussion. So I do hope we can do that virtually here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. So you left plenty of time for questions. I'm not seeing that many in the chat yet. Right, they're coming now.
Excellent.
You also had a question for us.
So, I did. I'd love to hear if anybody is.
I'll ask people who please raise your hand in the chat or put something in the chat, and then I'll ask you to ask the question yourself. We do have time. So Paris goes first. Paris Afghari.
Hi guys. Thanks a lot, Michael. That was a really inspiring talk, and I have to admit I really liked the book. I was wondering about one of your attributes, considering the whole design space. Sorry, that's my kids in the other room that just walked in. So I was wondering, considering the whole design space is certainly necessary, I see the value, but what happens if you have a really large system where you have hundreds of design decisions or even thousands? How can you scale it up? How can you actually consider the whole design space if the design space is huge?
Yeah, well, thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed the book. That really feels nice. So how can you consider anything that's really huge, I guess, is the first thought that comes to mind. And in my experience and what I've seen, we break things down into smaller pieces. We look at smaller chunks at a time. And when we're looking at these smaller kind of just right size, bite-sized kinds of chunks, we try and be open to kind of seeing as much of it as we can. Really, I guess that's what I'm referring to. That example that I showed of 30 plus decisions kind of over the course of a few months. That's a project that I'm hoping is going to run for another couple of years, right? So it should end up being quite a lot. We don't. I guess we take things very incrementally. We don't try and do everything all at the same time. In my experience. But one thing I've noticed, I guess, thinking about this a little bit, is and I guess one of the greatest confusions when talking about design with folks, especially on my team, is we come in with different assumptions about different granularities of abstraction. And so I guess what I wonder is the things that I was talking about today perhaps were at a smaller granularity, kind of a finer grain than what you might be thinking of at this moment. So that could be one thing. Yeah, I don't know. I'd be interested to hear some of your experiences with kind of going bigger. I think the main point though was don't focus on just the problem or don't focus on just the solution. Kind of be open to allowing both of them to come in at the same time. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, I think that sounds in the right direction. If I may follow up, I don't know if you've considered, for example, architecture viewpoints or perspectives, as other people call them, as a way to kind of split up the design space and have a more focused illustration of different decisions that are regarding a specific subsystem or a specific quality attribute. I don't know if you think that would work well with your practices.
Absolutely. I use viewpoints all the time. I find that I sneak them in. I don't tell people what I'm doing. So that seems to help it kind of go down. But yeah, absolutely. And actually thinking about, I'm just going to go ahead and add that to the list right now. Like I found when I was sitting down, all of a sudden my mind goes blank. It's like, I can't think of all the things that are amazing, but yeah, viewpoints are fantastic.
Owen Woods, who's on the call, can relax now with viewpoints and perspectives. I like the message. Sneak them in. I do the same in the lecture. Actually, I would like to ask the second question, and then Justus. I looked up the definition of the word mob. I like all your messages. I know how to improve. Then I have to improve my methods now to meet your criteria. But is mob programming a good name? First, you pointed out that it's not only about programming; it's much about designing. And the mob is a large crowd of people, especially one that is disorderly and intent on causing trouble or violence. Do we need a better name for mob programming?
Yeah, we might need a better name for it.
Suggestions welcome from the crowd.
Absolutely. Yeah, Woody Zool has a lot of really great resources on it. He also pokes fun at that, like, oh, well, we called it mob, okay, and then programming, but like we do a lot.
It gives you attention. It for sure gives you attention.
Certainly.
All right, Justus, you're next. Next question.
Yeah, thank you. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts on or practical experience with domain-driven design and how you would rate it in the context of the attributes that you just described for your other methods.
Yeah, domain-driven design, that community in particular is doing some amazing stuff in the design world right now for software design. I see a lot of really cool ideas coming out of the domain-driven design community. Event storming, I've used a handful of times. I really like it. I think it's a fantastic technique. I think, let's see here. The only reason it didn't make kind of the short list here today is because, well, that very reason. I've only used it a handful of times. It's not one of those things that's a constant go-to for me. Right, but it is definitely one of my favorite tools in my toolbox. Context mapping, another wonderful technique, kind of the same thing. It comes and it goes opportunistically at the right moments. There's a domain storytelling is another one that I've seen that I haven't had a chance to use yet, but looks very interesting. And I'm sure there's a lot more. Suddenly drawing a blank, but.
How do you sell these approaches? You said you don't even mention that. Sometimes people are skeptic. Why do we need this? Why do we need to model? Why is a context map a good idea? You have sales argument for us as method engineers?
How do we sell these things? So typically, like I bring things opportunistically when it seems like there's a moment when they will bring value. So to take event storming as an example, I guess, and kind of the difference between one of these mighty methods versus like event storming, which seems like it's super close. Event storming is a little more complicated. There are several steps, I guess, to the process. Kind of an intimidating number of sticky notes, different colors. And what I've found is sometimes it's the outcome can be dependent upon the facilitator. So it seems to require just a little bit more training to do really, really, really well. A little bit more practice, I think. Comparing that to something with example mapping, which I'm able to bring in as like well, let's just try this out. It'll take a half hour, not a huge use of time. I can teach it in the first like 3 minutes, 4 minutes of the session. And then yeah, we have something that's kind of immediately applicable, whereas like an example map, sometimes you're exploring a lot. Might not have like a concrete outcome necessarily, other than learning, I suppose. But
yeah, thank you, Michael. We have time for one more, and that would be Stan Greener.
So thanks a lot for the presentation. As we are in the industry track, I would like to ask a question about the sustainability, or how I can as a practitioner evaluate whether a tool or a toolbox will stay stable over the time. I mean, in ThoughtWorks there is like this radar technologies to pick in, technologies to let go. Is there something similar?
That's an interesting idea. I think with these, looking at kind of the silver toolbox as a whole, I think the O'Reilly radar is, or the ThoughtWorks radar is maybe a great indicator for what your go-to tools should be. I decided to kind of pick on these methods in particular just because, for me anyway, they have been coming up and in use again and again and again for 2 or 3 years now. And it seemed to be something that was very unique compared to other ideas.
Nice.
Right. I think we're about to run out of time. We said 4:45 here in Central Europe is the end of the session. We're heading for the social meetup. Michael, are you still available for another 10-15 minutes in Teams
Absolutely.
so that people can contact you directly to ask additional questions or
Absolutely.
get some?
I'd love to. I'll stick around.
Excellent. We did that with the other keynoters. So there will be a channel in the Teams called Micheal Keeling.
But Olaf, sorry to interrupt, Olaf. Hi,
Yeah.
Michael. Hi, everybody. We can also stay here because all the people is already here. Now it's, I mean, there is no other presentation for the next 15 minutes. So we can, I mean, the easy way is to continue here. Meanwhile, we are creating a channel for him, as we did for the other keynotes. Yeah. If there can be some other, questions going on even, tonight or tomorrow.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, but let me first of all, thank Michael one more time for the splendid keynote. I learned a lot, as always, when I listen to you. I know what I have to do in the next method engineering activities to meet your criteria. Thanks, Michael. And now we continue a little less formally, right? And anybody who has a question or an opinion, just speak up. So we go on here a little bit. Are there more questions and comments?
Yeah, I have a question. Janja is here from the Netherlands. Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear
Go
me?
ahead.
Hi.
Yeah,
Hi, Michael. Very nice talk. Thanks a lot. Really nice. I'm immediately off buying your book on Amazon. So
Thank you.
So I was wondering that this is a really nice tool for the most likely experienced architects. Have you tried it with novice architects, especially people who are transitioning from engineering positions to architect positions?
Absolutely. So I actually have that direct experience. So my team at IBM was very novice. Most of them were directly out of university. So that chart that we saw earlier of kind of ADRs over time for that group, many of them, that was their first time, that was their first jobs for some of them. I think it was me and maybe 1 or 2 other experienced engineers on that team of about 9 or 10 people. So these methods work extremely well with novice engineers. They are, I think for me, the thing that I find most kind of beneficial is that I have an opportunity for mentoring a lot more. So with the mobbing, I'm right there in the mob. With the ADRs, I'm right there able to kind of give code review or delegate kind of design responsibilities, which is kind of neat. With an experienced team, so my current job at Lending Home, my team is significantly more experienced. Similarly, these methods are still powerful. Instead of being in a kind of a mentoring role, I get to kind of sit back a little bit more. And I don't know, everybody just kind of shifts roles often. And everybody wants to, because we're so experienced, they want to be aware of what's happening. They know that they need to know what's going on. And a lot of these methods kind of help with that as well. So I guess with an experienced group, it shifts the way that I interact with it, and the way the team uses it shifts a little bit. But it still seems to be very effective.
Okay, great, thanks. I have one more question, and I think the rest I will contact you via email and then ask about it. Because so the next question is let's say you had for the decisions you had this your record the decisions and then you would also write the consequences, but have you also maybe encountered or used LTO ports template, decision story template, where it also looks into other design alternatives and also show like what kind of things you excluded actually in your decision, right? Because we cannot have a perfect decision most of the time.
Yep, absolutely. Those will show up in the context sometimes. We've occasionally had a section, I call it the paths not taken. So the things that we chose not to do or different alternatives that were considered and rejected. Yep, those are all wonderful, wonderful things to include as well. I think with ADRs, I tend to show the simple template, but there's a lot of variation and there's no wrong way to do it really.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
Thomas, Antonio, you want to go next?
I have one question regarding, I saw that you showed the Miro board where you combined the example flows, the domain model. How do you deal with the combination between different tools for modeling and then for collaboration? Because what I found most that there's not an ideal tool out there for both. And copy pasting between the tools is, yeah, it feels a lot of effort to do that. What do you do?
Yeah, so true. We've been scrambling to figure that out, especially since going remote. Let's see here. My teams have always been the types that would just sketch on whiteboards and just leave them hanging out around the office all the time. So that's kind of what we've mimicked, I think, perhaps accidentally in the remote collaboration tools as well. I think we don't, I guess we don't tend to do a lot of like formal modeling in modeling tools. We rely more on sketching. And then when it comes time for formal type models, we turn to the code itself and try and do our best to kind of encode the architecture into the code as best as we can. Yeah, I guess I don't have as much experience with that, but I'd be curious to hear if you've found some things that are interesting and working. No? Oh, that's too bad.
That's why I'm asking.
No, well, maybe there's someone else here. There's a lot of people online, so.
Yeah, I would be glad to be here. Some ideas of to combine that.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Antonio, are you still around?
Hi, hello. Thank you for your presentation. The question I have is, which methods integrate more seamlessly with the code base? So that we really don't have this gap between the modeling of the architecture and the code, and that you can actually integrate more with development.
Yeah, so that's actually a good call out. So these particular methods don't do so well with that. I would say example mapping is probably the closest, but only insofar as it sets up a framework for kind of testing and things like that. I think George Fairbanks' work on model-minded development is probably one of the closer ones that I've seen. I think that's a really, he's got a lot of fantastic ideas on that front of how do we take these theories that we're building in our heads and kind of sharing amongst our team, and how do we actually encode those into the system itself so that we can find them and know that they are actually there. How do we maintain and evolve that over time? So I guess I would point towards those methods if we really want to get into like putting the model into the code. Now I've used that phrase. So I have done some model-driven architecture, model-driven engineering in the past. I don't know. I didn't have a very positive experience with that, but maybe there are others who have, who could endorse them more strongly. Yeah, the kind of round trip engineering, re-engineering. I guess I lean on the theory building, right? George Fairbanks kind of ideas more so than just the sheer act of like making sure that my UML diagram is in sync with my code. The ideas I think are more important, making sure those are consistent. But
okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Not sure if that answered your question at all, but thanks for your question.
More questions? I have one. And then we have time for one or two more until the top of the hour. A provocative one, Michael. This was too easy so far. People like
Sure.
So you know that I'm a big fan of George's work too. His architectural haikus inspired my why statements for decision capturing. We achieve this, but we have negative consequences over there. And the haiku format is really crisp and compact and great. But since you mentioned his broader work on model-minded development, does it really meet your fifth criterion, which is it's easy to teach? Fun to use, I do agree, because I love modeling. Not everybody will agree, I suppose, in practitioner land, but is it really easy to teach model-minded development?
Yeah, I don't think it is. And I think that's the one thing that maybe, I guess if we could do a call to action for the folks that are here. There's a lot of promise, I think, in the model-minded development. But you're right, it takes it takes some serious knowledge. You have to have some background to be able to kind of apply those ideas. And if we can crack that nut, if we can kind of figure out how to make those ideas more accessible, I think we could have a lot of, we could have an extremely powerful method there.
Yeah,
to be clear, already very useful. So I guess even more powerful.
Yeah, excellent. No, very well put. Actually, this is one of the big topics at the software architect conferences like XR or here XR. And we had some really good discussions both yesterday and today in various sessions and working paper presentations and working sessions where people gave tips and tricks. Thomas Kurpik had a link to a really nice website that has hints for modelers, how they can convince audiences that this is important and valuable. So yeah, thanks for the candid answer. We have time for one or two more. Yeah, actually, it's 3 minutes until the top of the hour, and the guys that use the same channel for the next set of paper presentations will appreciate if we end a minute earlier. We're already 12 minutes over. Michael, again, thank you so much for having gotten up very early and presented your toolbox or parts of your toolbox to us. And was great to hear the reaction from the attendees. I hope you all found it useful and inspiring. I certainly did. Anybody who wants to speak with Michael a bit more, switch over, if that's okay with you, Michael, to that special that has your name in the Teams.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. This is wonderful. It's been interesting the past several months, and just to be able to like connect with everyone is just really great. I really appreciate it.
It works remarkably well, and that's but also a big thank you to Henry and his team for setting up this super professionally and sending us education decks about how to work with the teams here, and it works all very smoothly. And it's I was skeptic about the online virtual conference because I like the face-to-face networking part, but it does work, and we're glad to hear that you have the same impression. Thanks again, and
thank you very much. Thank you very much from the team.
Yes, thank you, Henry. I'll stick around for a little while. I guess I'll see you all in the other channel.